Well, hey everybody, Brian Goulet here of GouletPens.com, and this is episode number 218 of Goulet Q&A. And I took off last week. Hope you don't mind, but I did try to make it worth your while missing out on me because, well, you still got some of me, but we also got some of Nathan Tardif, the founder of Noodlers Inc. So if you have not seen that video yet, you definitely should. So when I had the privilege of going up there and meeting Nathan in person for the first time, was this in May, recorded a video and we just published it last week, so you should check that out if you haven't already. Really interesting. If you've seen any of Nathan's videos before, you would think he's like an 80-year-old gray-haired wizard, right? But no, he's actually surprisingly spry and surprisingly young. That seems to be the overwhelming comment that everybody left on YouTube, but it was really, really cool for me to get to sit down with him, and it was a great honor to see some of his shop. Unfortunately, I couldn't show him any of his operation in the video, but we did get to have a nice little sit-down chat amongst the hummingbirds in nature. So that was kind of cool, pretty surreal for me. Before I get into the whole video here, I will say I was off last week, came off vacation. Rachel got sick. So I was like powering through, taking care of her and the family and all that kind of stuff. Now we're both kind of under the weather. She's kind of coming out of it. I'm kind of going into it / like completely resisting it and refusing to admit that I'm sick. Typical kind of thing that I do. So if I come across as a little bit under the weather or a little bit tired, that would be why. Also been working like 12-hour days coming off of catching up on vacation and stuff like that. So anyway, I still, despite not feeling 100%, I'm going to give you 100% of whatever it is that I have so that you can still have a fruitful Q&A experience here. So I'm not going to let it take away from the time that I spend with you all. So let's see here, what has been going on. Did a couple of interesting right nows this week. Got to have Jen on from our community coordinators team there. She manages our Instagram. So if you have not gotten to see Jen, she talks about what it's like to be a new fountain pen user and rekindling what little fountain pen use she did have back when she was a kid. So there's some of that. And then also did one earlier in the week with Drew. We did a little Lamy Safari versus Lamy All-Star. New little thing we're trying to mix it up with the right now a little bit. So we're going to experiment on some things, and I'm trying to tighten them up a little bit too. They've been running really long. We're trying to make them a little shorter. So I don't know. We'll see. Something interesting that we're doing this week. So Colorverse actually made these shirts. They are Trailblazer in Space shirts to, basically promote their newest line of inks. They just released Hayabusa, which we have now. It's a twin purple ink, one with shimmer, one without. And I think the little bottle's got shimmer. 65 ml and a 15 ml bottle. And this beautiful packaging. It's a very much like a Lamy dark lilac color, that nice deep purple. Beautiful color. So we have those, and then we got 3 of these shirts, and I was like, well, what the heck, let's give them away. So we're gonna do a little contest here on the YouTubes. So between now, when this video is launched, and Sunday, July 22nd, 2018, so it's only a couple days from now, at 11:59 p.m., so the whole day of Sunday, Eastern US time, because that's where we are, you can leave a comment on YouTube, and your comment can be, what is your favorite Colorverse ink? Whether you've used it or not, or you just kind of like it and think you would want it, whatever, just kind of leave your Colorverse preference in a comment, and that will enter you into the contest. And then we'll pick 3 winners at random, and you will get this awesome shirt with your little space cat, and then the back of it has this huge Trailblazer in Space Colorverse thing, and a set of the ink as well. So all this can be yours for the low, low price of 4 seconds of your time in the comments on YouTube. I will say we have limited size options on the shirts, so it may end up being more of a tapestry than an actual clothing item for you, depending on your size. But anyway, we'll do our best. We got them, so we're going to give them away. You can see more details on that in the YouTube video description if you're interested. And if you're watching this after that time, sorry, the contest is over. Some other interesting things that we've had. So we have the Retro 51 Buzz, which is pretty cool. Comes in this neat little tube. It's linked up with Honeybee Habitat Restoration, new NW Honeybee, yeah, Northwest Honeybee Restoration. Okay, I need to read up on that a little bit, but it's part of like their rescue series. So they actually do donate a portion of their proceeds to help save the bees. But it's a really cool looking pen. It's just very captivating. Like it's one of their acid etch pens, so it's like got kind of a three-dimensional texture to it. And so it's not just like a wrap or a print. So it feels, that's part of why the price is a little higher. If you ever notice on any of the Retro 51 pens, the three-dimensional ones, the price is just a little bit higher. And then it's got honeybees all over it. And the honeycomb pattern on it is very shiny. I'm gonna see when you turn it in the light, just like, whew, so compelling. And the texture feels so satisfying on the fingers. And then it's just kind of, you can just stand it up on your desk, boop, right there. Pretty cool, you know. The only rollerball pen that we have at the moment is a Retro 51, but it's been pretty well received so far. Oh, and then of course the top has a little honey bear on the top. So honey bear? That's not a thing. Bear. Bear's like honey. It's got a bear on the top. Let's see here. What else? The Retro 51 P51 that also came in. We didn't get as many as we ordered, but they all like came and went. You could say they flew. Anyway, Platinum 3776 Kumpu, which looks unreal. I knew as soon as I saw this picture, I was like, we're not gonna get enough. I just guarantee we're not gonna get enough. We got super shorted on the Ultra Extra Fine and the Soft Fine, I believe it was. They were like gone in 4 seconds. Soft mediums, we may have a couple left by the time this video comes, I don't know. But I don't even know that we're gonna get restocked. So I hate to even promote it, but it's just a gorgeous pen, so I just wanted to show it to you close up. I ended up keeping one for myself because and here it is. And when it catches the light, you can see it's got this swirl pattern to it that just like, wow. It's literally like the ocean is just like waving through your pen. And it has a texture to it, you feel it, but it's not as deep of a groove of a texture as what you have with the like lilas or the lavande. So it's a little more subtle, but it is very satisfying, and it kind of like, you can like feel your finger along the grooves. It looks really good with the rhodium trim and everything. It's a little more expensive. This pen went up a little bit, I guess because of the technique they had to do or something, but it's pretty cool. Numbered limited edition is what, 19, I have 1925, but there's 2,500 of them total. That's probably why we're not getting that many. And then, didn't want to show that yet. Then we also got 1798 Gerabon Corline d'Egypte. Forgive me if I botched that. But it's a nice new orange ink with some shimmer to it. You can see that ink is shimmering pretty good. And you want to shake it up a little bit. That shimmer goes into the ink. So you want to give it a good shake when you use it, but that's their latest ink. Their shimmering inks are some of the best behaved ones that you can get out there. So least clogging, really good performance, nice color. It's a really attractive orange ink if that's something that you're into. So I highly recommend that you check that out if you are so inclined. We got the TWSBI 580 ALR, which is slightly different than the 580 All. They basically just tweaked a little bit of the grip, a little bit of the design, and maybe another component to it. I need to get one in my hands actually. I've been out, so I don't have all the details, but I know it's very, 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 very similar. So anyway, you can check that out. The Pelikan M815 striped metal, we got those in. We got two new Organic Studios inks, Arginine and Cystine. We also got Visconti, Van Gogh, Dr. Gachet, and Red Vineyard. We have Aurora Optima Flex in orange and purple. We got Colorverse Season 4, and that more or less covers everything that happened while I was out last week. It's been very active around here. Coming soon, probably next week, is going to be Diplomat. So we're going to have the Diplomat in here. I have my Arrow, which I took with me, and did some heavy lifting on notes while I was at my work conference. Not work conference, personal conference last week, and did a really, really good job. So I'm happy with that pen. Visconti Homo Sapiens Evolution is coming, as well as the 5 new Gerabon 30 mil colors and some Clairefontaine Aquarelle notebooks as well, which is a special order thing that we did. It's like white notebooks with like inky kind of colored splatter type stuff on it. So looks kind of similar to some of the ink and water stuff that we have around our office. So we thought that was kind of neat, kind of fun, something different. So those are finally coming in, and we ordered those like a long time ago. But anyway, now they're coming in. So that's it for product stuff. And now I'm going to talk about pens. I don't really have much more pen-wise to show you the rest of the video here, so won't be zooming in and out constantly like I did there at the beginning. But let's get into some questions. I've only got 5 questions this week because I just need to take it a little bit easier than I have been. So that's what I'm going to limit it to. I'm going to start out with the personal questions. This is from Manav A on Facebook. I don't normally lead off with a personal question, but this one is kind of relevant to me. Did you know Jim Rouse? I understand that he just passed away. His sig nibs are truly incredible. So if you've been on Instagram or on most of the social media channels, it's been hard to avoid the passing of Jim Rouse. So he was a nibmeister, active in the pen world. He was been involved in the industry for decades, and I believe he was the main nib guy at Franklin-Christoph. So I didn't know Jim personally. I knew of Jim quite a bit. There's not that many people that do nib work. He wasn't a nibmeister that I was aware of that kind of operates like Mark Bacchus or Mike Masayama or somebody like that, where you send them whatever pen you want and they fix, and do it. But he worked for Franklin-Christoph. So basically, if you bought a Franklin-Christoph pen, you probably had some of Jim's handiwork there. But it was interesting because Drew and I went to the Atlanta Pen Show back in April, and Jim was interviewed on the Pen Addict podcast. And we were in the room as that was happening. They did a live interview thing at the Atlanta show. And he really kind of told his whole story there. And I didn't really know him that well. So I learned more about his story as I watched him do this interview. And it was just very evident to me that he had just this passion for the pen community and for pens that very much resonates with me. I've devoted almost a decade of my life to it. Over a decade if you consider the pen making that I did before. And I plan to spend several more decades in it. So that really resonated with me, and I connected. Even though I didn't have a personal relationship with him, I had a personal connection with him because of how much of myself I devote to some of the same things that he did. It was kind of a very unfortunate passing of his. And while I don't have much to add in the way of information around all that, what I can say is I heard wonderful things from everybody that interacted with him. His passing was kind of a shock, and it's definitely hit me hard and made me kind of think, just about that, because I find myself in kind of a similar track in some ways. So, and I think for me, obviously, his passing was sudden, and it was something that, I'm thinking a lot about him and his family, folks at Franklin-Christoph, and all the people kind of in the pen show community especially, but in the pen world that interacted with him and feel that loss. But also, too, kind of makes you reflect a little bit about yourself and your own situation sometimes when someone who's really tied into your community passes. And I think about wow, especially because it was relatively sudden. I mean, he was 61, I think, and it just wasn't something that anyone anticipated. So when I think about gosh, the amount of knowledge that he had around his passion, how much did he document and pass on and all that kind of stuff. I think about that kind of stuff for myself because I'm gosh, I've spent a lot of time as well. Obviously, I document a lot in video form and blog posts and things like that too, and within our company. But I'm thinking about that for the long term. Okay, as I go on and on, one day that's going to happen to me too, and so I want to be prepared for that. So not weighing on me really, really, every moment of every day, but for sure some of the loss that I'm feeling, not just for him as a person, but for him as a contributor to the pen community. Undoubtedly, there is knowledge that he took with him that we will never have back. So that kind of stinks. The whole situation is just kind of tough, but it's been really encouraging to see the great things that have been being said about him and all that. So my thoughts and prayers go to him and his family and everybody else whose lives were touched by him. So I don't really know where to send you if you want to give any of your thoughts, but I know there's been a lot of stuff posted on Instagram. Certainly the folks at Franklin-Christoph will probably be a source of information there for you if you're interested in learning more. All right, so that was the little heavier part, and then we'll lighten it up a little bit as we go later into the Q&A here. I have a pen and writing question. This is from GadgetStop321 on Instagram. I know many pens are turned on a lathe or made from injection molded plastic. Have you heard of any pens being made with a 3D printer? So far, I've seen some that have been like experimental. I haven't seen any like mass-produced 3D printer stuff. You know, of course, the 3D printer industry, if you will, is finding itself. There's a lot of 3D printed things or 3D printing, products that are being made in like a very much of a prototype fashion. That's part of the advantage of 3D printers, is that you can prototype things. So I don't know of anyone who's like built a business model around doing 3D printed pens yet. There are some smaller people that I'm seeing that are kind of experimenting with some of that. Not small people, but people early in their careers that are thinking of doing some of that stuff that I kind of have my eye on. And I don't know anyone well enough to like point you to anybody right now, but I've seen some experimental things and it's kind of on my radar. So I'm thinking about that kind of stuff. It's a relatively new technology. I wouldn't be surprised if we started to see some more of that stuff coming out. It's difficult with something like that because, there's such a good process and so many different ways of making pens that, I don't know immediately what opportunity the 3D printer has towards the writing instrument that it will be able to provide. I have yet to see something other than just an aesthetic design aspect. I haven't seen anything that's like been truly revolutionary in terms of time savings, cost savings, material used, or anything like that have been able to like, whoa, this could change everything. It's kind of like, oh, okay, this is just a different tool, a different way of making a pen that could make for an interesting design. I'm eager to see where it could go, especially as the technology improves. But as of right now, I don't have anything like firm on my radar that like, oh my gosh, this will do everything. So if you guys have any feedback about that, you have any, thing on your radar of, that like 3D printed pens and stuff like that, I'm very interested in learning about that. So just go ahead and leave in the comments on YouTube, and I would love to hear more about what you're seeing as well. So for me, it's very much like speculative. I'm keeping my eyes out, but don't have anything like firm that's like, yeah, these people, they're killing it. All right, so now let's get into a couple of ink questions, shall we? The first one here is from Alejandra B on Facebook. Why do people dilute inks with water? Is it to make them less dry? Maybe to make them shade better? Can you alter the wetness, dryness of an ink? Lots of love from Spain. Well, lots of love from the US here as well. So the main reason that I know that people like to dilute their inks is to have a less saturated color. Particular, I think, of like Noodler's ink actually promotes diluting his inks because he maximizes the saturation. It's also why he maximizes the fill in the bottle, so that you can get basically the most bang for your buck. Well, Noodler's openly promotes the fact that you can dilute his inks and to make them last longer. So you can do that, dilute it, 25%, maybe even up to 50%, depending on the ink that you're using, and not really notice much of a degradation in color. So that can help your ink to spread out a little further if you want to make it go. Me, I've got more ink than 40 people can use in their lifetime. So that doesn't really make too much of a difference for me. But certainly if I wanted to have an ink that was really, really dark and I wanted to lighten up, I could dilute it. If you're doing that, I would recommend, if you're going to experiment with it, try doing it in like ink sample vials or some smaller amount, so that you're not just pouring ink or pouring water into your ink bottle and then you get it past the point of no return and then you're kind of stuck. You can't. It's a lot harder to undilute it, if that makes sense. So the other thing that I'll mention if you're going to be diluting inks at all is that you'll want to use distilled water, because that doesn't have any minerals or any additives or anything like that in there, and that will do the least to alter your ink solution in there. So as far as the rest of the questions you had, like does it make them less dry and stuff like that, I mean, you would think like, water is wet. If you're adding more water to your ink, it should make it wetter, right? Which sometimes that can happen. So let me explain. I'm no ink chemist here, but I believe I understand at least some of the major components of what makes up an ink. You have water, which is your main component. You have dye. You have some kind of lubricant. Oftentimes you have a biocide, something to kill off mold and stuff like that, but not always. and then usually salt, some sort of salinity, something to adjust pH maybe. So that is kind of like the main components. There may be other things in there that I'm ignorant to, but the main things I want to focus on is the water, the dye, and the lubricant. So what happens is you have those three components. Depending on how much of those three is actually in there, when you add more water to it, it could make it drier, it could make it wetter. It really depends on how much of the other two components you have in there. So if you have, sometimes you'll read about things online of like, oh, I used this ink and it was really dark and really didn't flow very well in my pen. I added water to it and that helped it to flow again. That can work well, especially if you're talking about older ink that maybe has some water that evaporated out of it, because that can happen. There's some people I know that have bottles of ink that are 50, 60, 70 years old that have over time, more or less concentrated. The dye isn't going to evaporate out of the bottle. The water will though. So you could end up with a much more concentrated solution of ink over time, and you can actually add distilled water into that. Now, assuming it's not contaminated in any other way, you can essentially reconstitute old ink and get it back up. So in that instance, that would be a very extreme case, but that would be where adding water would make it wetter, because you're diluting the dye and allowing it to flow better. Other inks, if they're heavily lubricated and you add water to it, it could actually cut down some of the lubricant and make it feel drier in your pen even. So it really, your mileage may vary kind of there, and I can't even tell you like which one this and which one that, because until you've gone through and done like dilution experiments individually on every single ink, which I'm not going to do, just quite frankly, I just don't have the time. So that's something you're going to have to experiment with, which I recommend you do in small quantities. So that's kind of thing. I think using water to cut down to affect the flow, not necessarily going to happen unless you have a really, really highly concentrated ink and something that like might have like a shimmer to it or something like that in there. Maybe diluting that could help it to flow a little bit, but for the most part, that's not the main reason why people are doing it. It can be to lighten up the color. A lot of artists who like to use them can do more ink washing and get more like a watercolor. It turns it more like a watercolor, and you can pull more colors out of it if you're adding water to it. And it can improve the shading as well. So if you have a really dark, really concentrated ink, you're not going to see as much of that shading. That's that light to dark kind of within each letter as you're writing it. But the more you water down the ink, basically, the more drastic the shading you're going to see. So that could be another reason why people like to do that. So it can be something fun that you kind of experiment with, especially if you are budget conscious and you're like, I can't buy an ink this month or next couple of months. Let me try taking some of the inks I have. Maybe I'll mix a couple, maybe I'll dilute a little bit and see if I can like breathe a little life into an ink that maybe I didn't love quite as much. Or I have an ink that I really love and I want to make it last a little longer. You can add a little bit of water to it and extend it out a bit. So good question though. This next one is from Carole V on Facebook. What are considered boutique inks? I've inherited a couple of vintage pens, and there's some common advice to avoid these and to use standard inks, whatever that is. On Fountain Pen Network, one reader stated that it was ink from smaller companies, but I'm guessing there's more to it. Could this be a Q&A question? Yes, Carole, it can be a Q&A question. I always love it when I can address a direct Q&A question as it is. So boutique is very much a generic term, right? Like I think especially, if you're dealing with people who are coming from the vintage world, boutique ink could essentially mean any ink company that's come around in the last 20 years. It could mean any small ink manufacturer. It could mean any ink manufacturer that's doing unconventional properties to it. It can mean basically whatever someone interprets it to mean. And the line gets awfully blurry, especially now because standard inks are not even as standard as they used to be. You take a long-standing company like, I'm trying to think of who's come out with something crazy. I mean, like J.R. Bond, for example, like they blur the line a little bit. So they're a very old, very long-standing, very conventional ink company, and now they have shimmer inks. So it's like, okay, they put it into a different series, But if you generalize and say Jeroboam ink, if you use something like Corland Egypt, which is new, that is not what I would consider to be a standard ink. But it comes from a company that makes some of the safest and most conventional inks around in the Jeroboam 30 mil, their conventional kind of line. So, what are you going to do? So I think it can mean whatever you want it to mean. But I think generally it refers to kind of the size of the company and whether their core focus is on ink and if they're doing things to push the envelope in terms of ink properties, or whether they are primarily a pen company who also carries ink. I think that's generally speaking, especially folks coming from the vintage world, they're kind of thinking, okay, it was very much, decades ago, it was you bought a Parker pen, you bought Parker Quink. You bought a Schaefer pen, you used Schaefer script. You bought a Waterman pen, you used Waterman ink. That was very much how it went. That's how the warranties all worked. All the companies would put out there, just like you would have a car company that would say, you have to use genuine authorized dealers for your maintenance and you got to use authorized parts when you swap them out, otherwise the warranty's not covered. It was kind of the same vibe with the fountain pen companies that they would say, only our ink should be used in our pen, otherwise it's not covered under warranty kind of thing. And to a degree it makes sense because if you think about it, when they're warranting their pens and they're seeing repairs and they're doing all the testing and all that kind of stuff, they're going to be using their ink in it. Now, does that mean that only their ink is going to work in their pen? Well, logically no, because each pen is not custom designed to be formulated to only work with their ink. You can use, even among the standard brands, say you want to go with the major pen companies, Waterman, Schaefer, Parker, Lamy, whatever, Montblanc. Even if you want to stick only with them, wouldn't you be able to use those with each other and be generally okay? Well, they can't standardize that. They can't guarantee what somebody else is going to come out with. So they generally would say, stick with the inks that we say to pair with the pens, and you're going to be okay. Well, that's not really how it goes so much anymore these days because, frankly, I think most fountain pen companies are so thrilled that people are using fountain pens anyway. It's kind of like, hey, whatever floats your boat, whatever makes you happy, just please don't put something in that completely destroys and eats the pen. But even that, as I've been involved in the fountain pen thing for the last 9 years or so, even that companies have kind of changed their tune a little bit. They used to be much more hard line, specifically against companies like Private Reserve or Noodlers. Takes a lot of hits for that because Nathan's come up with a lot of interesting properties on his inks, shimmering inks, that kind of stuff. A lot of companies used to be like, no, if you use that stuff in there, it's terrible. But what's happened over time is people have used it anyway, and they've realized you can't make such a blanket statement like that and think it's going to be cool. And because there's the internet and so many people are mixing stuff and doing reviews and all that kind of stuff, it's really much more kind of fluid than that. So I think that when you're dealing with vintage stuff, yeah, you may want to stick more to kind of your standard inks if you want, but standard could mean anything that you want it to mean. If you've got, I would say stay away from most permanent inks, stay away from pigmented inks, stay away from any shimmering inks, stay away from inks with a really heavy sheen for the most part. Anything that has kind of unconventional properties, kind of stick with your more basic properties, blues and blacks, and don't go with anything with too wild properties, and you're probably going to be pretty safe, right? Even then, that's up for debate because some people have been like, well, Waterman inks, some of their inks have a pH of like 2.8 or whatever, and they're like, how could they possibly say that blah, 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 blah. So it's something that because there's no formal standardized like MSDS sheet information out there for each one of these inks, it's all proprietary information as to what's actually in them. We can't really say definitively like use these, don't use these. It's largely based on people's experience and what they feel. There's some people who are very knowledgeable in the pen community that absolutely swear that certain brands of ink are the worst thing ever created. And there's the people that create those inks that completely disagree and are equally as respected in the pen community. So what are you going to do? Ultimately, caveat emptor. So you got to use whatever it is that you feel works best and use that in your pen. But I think generally speaking, if you're going with a non-extreme property ink, especially one that comes from a pen company, you're probably going to be in pretty good shape. But If it's something that's particularly valuable, particularly meaningful to you, obviously going with something like Waterman is revered as a pretty safe brand. You can go with J.R. Bond is really pretty safe, especially not their shimmering stuff, but if you go with their conventional line, really pretty safe stuff. And that's kind of where I'll leave it at that. But specifically talking about like boutique ink brands, I think that if you want to talk about who are the pen companies and who are the ink companies, of the brands that we have right now, the ones that are probably fall more into the boutique area would be Diamine, J.R. Bond, Robert Oster, Noodlers, Organic Studio, Colorverse, Three Oysters, Kyoto, and Roaring Cleaner. And then I think I got everybody in there. Diatramentus. I think I left them out. Yeah. I think that more or less covered everybody. And then most everybody else that I have, they come from, a pen company. So hopefully that helps you out. Maybe it will, maybe it won't. Maybe you're equally confused now or more confused. But either way, I wish you the best. All right, to close it out for this week, there's going to be a business question from kolecoomer on Instagram. Can you talk about some of your personal favorite brands that Goulet doesn't carry, i.e. Konid, Bexley, Franklin Christoph, etc.? And now that Opus 88 has been such a hit, can we expect something fresh, new? Can we expect some fresh new brands from Goulet? Thanks for keeping the pen dream alive. You're welcome, Cole. Okay, so I mentioned this before. There's a number of reasons why we may or may not carry something here at Goulet, and we're just one company, We're not like everything, so there might be some things that don't make sense for us, but might make a heck of a lot of sense for other pen companies. So, for us, there's always very specific individual reasons why we may or may not carry something that may or may not have anything to do with the quality product or the reputation of the brand or anything like that. There could be a lot of different reasons, but it's not quite as simple as it exists, therefore we should carry it. I wish it was that simple, especially in a global marketplace like we have today. It's not always so straightforward because, believe it or not, the world is actually a fairly big place. It's feeling smaller every day, but geographically, the world is just as big as it has been for a long time. So when we're getting brands from, South Korea, Taiwan, Japan, who knows where else, but those are some of the ones that are furthest away, Australia, that are furthest away from where we are. It takes a while. It takes a while and it's expensive, and there's language communication things to work through. So some of the brands that you mentioned here, like Konid, Bexley, Franklin Christoph, Konid's been selling direct and they haven't been large enough to wholesale. So I keep asking them, and I keep in touch on a pretty regular basis. I'm like, hey, Konid, how y'all doing? Y'all ready to do this yet? And we're in a friendly relationship. But no, it's largely been, they have a lot of respect for what we do. I obviously am in love with them. But they're just not ready for it yet. And that's totally cool. They may not be for a long time, and that's okay. They may not ever be. That would be less okay, but I would understand. Bexley, we haven't had a lot of people ask about Bexley. There could maybe be some potential there. So if that's something that's super interesting, that's just something that I haven't gotten a ton of interest towards them. It comes up every now and then, but maybe this can be your chance to really get it out there. Franklin Christoph, we've talked a little bit here and there. They're kind of more in Konid's camp. They've done some retailer exclusives, especially with some other people that do the pen show circuit, and they've done a limited number of a single design, one color for them, and then it sells out and that's it. But largely they're selling everything direct, and that's kind of been their business model, at least up until this point. I don't know if they're planning to change that in the future, but from what I hear, they stay pretty busy, so they're not really dying for that. It would have to be almost kind of a strategic move on their part. I don't know their company that well. That's just kind of my assessment of it. Is they would have to try to really go out and make that happen. It's possible, but I've had some communication here and there, but it's not an open, obvious thing for them. So there's a lot of relational things that happen between a manufacturer and if there's a distributor, the distributor as well, or directly with the retailer. Some companies don't have distributors in the middle. especially if they're smaller, especially if they're newer, they may not have that. Typically, you have distribution if you are really much larger and you're doing much greater volume, and you just can't handle, some brands, might have thousands or 10,000s of retail establishments across the world. To sell direct to 10,000 retailers is very hard. So that's where distribution comes up and all that kind of stuff. Anyway, I digress. That's not the point. Opus 88, you mentioned that, they're new and growing. They're learning stuff. We're learning stuff right along with them. Yeah, it's been received really well so far. We're experiencing a little bit of growing pains together because they're, growing at a pretty good click. And, it's something that I don't even have like full visibility into their operation, but, it's like we had a little issue with the Fantasia, like the cap was coming unscrewed a little bit, and we gave them that feedback, and I talked about it in Right Now a couple of weeks ago. We gave them that feedback, and they were like, oh my gosh, we got to fix this right away. So they're implementing a fix. That's awesome, but they're a newer company, so like they gotta go back and they gotta fix all of them, and they gotta send them back out and make sure they do that change ongoing. So there's stuff like that, these little things, like once you get them out in people's hands and you realize, oh my gosh, we tested this, but it was fine where we were, but once so many people got it in their hands and handled it in different ways, we realized we need to make this tweak or make this change, whatever. So the real challenge that I'm finding as a retailer is being in touch with you all in the community and seeing stuff on social media and stuff like that. I mean, literally someone can make a prototype of one single thing, and all of a sudden it starts to spread like wildfire throughout the pen community, and everybody's like, I want it now. And it's like, it's not even a thing yet. Like the average time for most of our companies that we deal with to develop a product start to finish, from the time that it is an idea to the time that it is deliverable, is usually like 2 to 3 years. So if a prototype or something gets leaked out too early, it could be such a long time before it's actually ready for me to stock it on the shelves as a retailer. So that is something that's kind of interesting. And so Opus 88, I was actually surprised we were able to start carrying it as quickly as we were. Colorverse is kind of the same situation. It's rare that I'll come across a brand that I haven't heard about, and then within a couple of months, be able to start carrying. There's a lot of them where I'll hear about a Kickstarter, or somebody will share something, a prototype, or they'll mention something that's, in some country that you can only buy it direct from the manufacturer in that country. And then it's usually 1 to 2 years of building that relationship with them, allowing them to grow and build up to the point where they're ready to, distribute globally, through retailers or through a distribution, channel of some kind, and that's kind of an interesting dynamic that we have now in the last 20 years or so, since the internet's really given rise to e-commerce. Is you have a person that can start manufacturing something in their garage and shipping globally. That's pretty cool, and that's pretty interesting. But even still, there's way more to it than that. If you want to actually sell through retailers like us. There's other brands that are kind of on my radar: Pen BBS, Moonman, any number of Kickstarters, Namisu, Trilogy, Desiderata, Additive Pens. There's a lot of folks that I'm keeping tabs on, talking to, Conid, that I'm very interested in. Herbert, I'm just throwing out names. So there's all kinds of people that I'm interested in and talking in long conversations with. But so many things have to hit right before they can become available. So, all the ones that I've mentioned here, some of these are kind of the ones, some that float to the top. Conid's up there. Herbert is really cool. He's in our town. He's like 15 minutes away from our office. So I've met him a few times, and we're going to maybe try to cook something up here in the future. But he's like working out of his garage kind of situation too. So the thing that I'll kind of leave off with this thought is that the one thing I can say is that I love hearing about what it is you're interested in. I love it. Rachel loves it. The whole team loves it. And we want to encourage that. And we want to always pursue brands that seem like they could retail reliably enough to fit within our mission statement. So there's 3 components to our company mission statement that really act as a filter for a lot of the decisions we make, really about everything that we do, but specifically around this type of stuff. Because when you're talking about carrying a new brand, there's a branding component, there's a standing behind your products, there's a service component to it, there's a relational aspect with the manufacturer. So the 3 components of our mission statement is comprehensive education, exemplary service, and products we believe in. So if we believe that we can do all 3 of those things, that the manufacturer can support all 3 of those things, and we're able to live up to that, then we're on a pretty good track, and we'll start moving down that path. But probably 8 or 9 times out of 10, I'll reach out to somebody, or they'll reach out to me. We'll start going down that road, having those conversations, and certain aspects of it will start to show cracks and start to break down a little bit. Either they don't have the capacity to really be able to handle the volume that they would need to support their direct sales and ours and other retailers who may be interested. It may be that they, just aren't producing a product that we feel that we could represent the best. Maybe it's a decent product, or maybe there's certain aspects of it that we would rather be changed, but they have their way of doing it and we just don't see on the same page, and we're like, okay, that's cool. So there's a lot of things that we have to kind of run through as a filter. But yeah, that's kind of it. So as far as new brands that you can expect, I've mentioned a bunch here. Some of them I've already been talking to for more than a year or 2, and it's just going to take a while. Others, could be sooner than later, but there's nobody that I've got that's going to be in the next. Nobody that I've mentioned here today is going to be in the next 4 to 6 months, probably. So it's all super, super, super long form, which is why I usually don't like to talk about this stuff. I mean, if you think about historically what we've done at Goulet, when we moved our physical building, we worked on it for 18 months. We announced it 3 weeks before we moved. And that's when we made it public. When we moved our website, we announced it, was it the week before we moved? 2 weeks? I can't remember. But we kept it under wraps really up until it was pretty much happening. So with a new brand, it's like, I can't mention it like 8 months out, because then there's so many questions I can't answer, and 8 months goes by. So much of your life changes. So try to keep that stuff more to the chest until it's much more imminent. So I may or may not have things that are imminent. I may or may not have products that are right outside the frame of this camera, literally, that are in the works. But anyway, that's little perks for you. Anyway, so that's about all I have for this week. My question of the week for you is, what are your favorite summer pens, ink and paper? Really thinking like if you're on summer vacation, traveling, that kind of thing. What's some of your favorite gear there? Do you change it up in the holiday, in different seasons? Do you think, do you use more turquoise inks or orange inks or whatever in the summertime, and more blue blacks and blacks in the winter? I don't know. I'd be kind of curious to hear just kind of like what's kind of your summer vibe that you've got going on. And then a writing prompt for anybody interested in having a reason to physically write with their pen. I'll give you one right here, kind of along the lines of the whole summer travel pens thing. Just write a short little story about what's the most memorable trip that you ever went on. And you can just kind of keep that for yourself, or maybe share it with yourself. Yeah, there you go. Share it with somebody that you care about, or maybe somebody went on the trip with you, and maybe you can recall some cool memories. But writing it out in long form will make you think about all that, and you kind of go back to it, and maybe you went somewhere cooler where you're not sweating all the time and you can recall that. I don't know. It's pretty warm where we are in Virginia, but maybe you're not. Maybe you're on the southern hemisphere and it's your winter time. I don't know. But either way, would love to hear more about what you have going on in your life. You can leave comments about anything we talked about here on YouTube. You can check out a lot of what we talked about on gouletpens.com. Thanks for liking, commenting, and subscribing. Hope you have a great weekend and a great rest of your week, and right on.